A big challenge for all of us as leaders and those who are emerging as leaders is this thing about how to make decisions. Now, let's be honest. I think all of us would say that making decisions is just something that we do. And at the same time, it's our job to make decisions. So we don't think we have to go looking for help. In fact, if you think you have to go looking for help, that looks bad. But what if decision making was a process? And is this the reason that we find ourselves deeply stressed, upset, frustrated, and thwarted in our ability to express leadership? And indeed, do you think that if we actually mastered that skill, that in fact the relationship that we have and the struggles that we have in taking care of people may actually be easier? So that's a couple of questions that I've got today for my guest. I'm very thrilled to be sitting here today with Paul Gordon. Paul is the expert in decision-making processes that he's used as a consultant for 15 years. He's here today. I asked him to come and talk to me about this thing, about decision making, quite frankly, because I didn't understand the process myself. And I couldn't think of anybody better than Paul to talk about this. I had a number of queries coming from people that I know and from clients when I asked them, what is the one thing that you'd really like to develop in? And I was really shocked when they said, critical decision-making skills. Because honestly, I did think I was pretty good and I thought, well, I could solve that problem. And then I went, actually, I have no idea how to solve that problem. So please welcome Paul.
Thank you, Kylie. Great to be here.
I do want to start with finding out a little bit about your area of expertise and specifically about what it is that you do. So why don't I hand over to you on that, if you can tell us about what that is? Absolutely.
Great place to start from, because I think most people in the world don't realize that decision making is a thing. It's just something that we do. Yet there is a need, and I've spent at least the last 15 years of my life working with leaders in large organizations, helping them make hard, complex, big, multi-billion-dollar often decisions. And most people I start working with, the first thing is there is a surprise. There is even a body of science called decision. So some people might call me a decision scientist. That doesn't mean I wear a white coat with pens in my pocket, but there is a realm of science. And in fact, it's a fascinating realm because it's wrapped up from psychology, from economics, from statistics, across a whole range of spectrums, including, of course, a lot of those things you mentioned earlier, those soft skills.
And so when did this actually start for you?
I guess my journey in the world of decision-making expertise started about 15 years ago when I was in the middle of running a software startup that I'd created myself. And I was having some fun with it, but it wasn't quite setting the world alight. I then came across someone who had a consultancy in decision-making, and I thought, that sounds interesting. He was looking for some help with the technology. So he and I together joined forces and created the firm that I now run in Australia and New Zealand today. And that was a bit of happenstance on the one hand, but also driven by my interest in, I guess I like the technology, I like software, but more importantly, I like how that connects with people. And for me, the biggest fun that I have is in bringing groups of people together to make hard decisions supported by software, data, and technology.
So given this question I did have about decision making itself seems like why would we bother talking about that? I mean, really, it's just something that's part of our everyday life, right? We make decisions every single day. Why would anybody reach out to a consultant, firstly, to confess the fact that they think, like it seems to me like you'd have to make a confession that you need somebody to help you make decisions. Is that a fair comment?
That's exactly right. It is. And I'll be honest, it's one of the perennial challenges of me professionally because, of course, no one is reaching out saying, where can I get help making decisions? So how I even position what I do is a big challenge. I think, and the immediate answer to that, I guess, is, like always, is to look at the symptoms first. And the symptoms of people who are struggling with making decisions might not look like it's a decision-making problem. For them, it might occur like the team isn't aligned, they're not delivering on the strategy, the business isn't performing in the way they thought it would, they feel disconnected, a whole range of symptomatic things, which as soon as I get a conversation with them, okay, there's the root cause there is your decision-making process and the way you're making decisions. So that's, I guess, what causes people to either to find us or, frankly, for us to find them is to see those problems going on in the world.
Yeah, okay, great point. So I guess then the question becomes, it sounds like you've got a few problems that you end up solving for people. So let's start with that. What are some of the key or common problems that you know that you're addressing with this?
Yeah, great. And that's often where we start. So I guess the first and foremost, one of the biggest problems we solve is with an organization that feels it's unsustainable into the future. So they look at either the money they're making or the funding they've got if they're a public sector organization. They look at what they've got to do over time and they realize the two don't add up. And often they come to that realization after they've done what one might consider the traditional approaches of cost savings, efficiency, centralization of resources, all those good things, and then they realize that hasn't solved the problem for them. So that kind of long-term sustainability, especially from a financial performance perspective, is one of the big problems that we help solve, because underneath that is a decision, or lots of decisions, particularly around what should we be doing, what shouldn't we doing, what should we stop, what should we do more of, what should we do less of. And those are the kind of decisions that would prompt me to go, I can see how we can help there. So that's, I guess, probably our biggest, most common thing that we do. And we've looked at that in multi-billion-dollar organizations, in looking at the entire organization. I guess the next thing where people have a challenge is they're living in a world of frustration because their desk is piling up with too much to do. They haven't got the people to do it. They haven't got the resources to do it, whatever that might be. In fact, a classic example there is we work with chief information officers whose list of IT projects that they've got to execute never gets any shorter. And the more the world embraces technology, the more they're under the pump. And so their challenge there is, which projects should I proceed with, which shouldn't I? And how do I tell the people whose projects I'm not going to do that I'm not going to do their project? And so I guess that's the kind of the next challenge. And then I suppose another big challenge we have is what I'd call one-off decisions. So we're facing a major challenge. What do we do? Do we open up a new market? Do we move our head office? Do we launch a new product? So one-off, what's the right thing to do kind of decisions.
I've also, so there's a few big ones there. In fact, I do want to make sure today, given we've got a limited period of time, this sounds like there's like a can of worms actually. So in fact, what I'd like to do is certainly touch on each of those points, but I think what we'll do, Paul, is we'll come back and we'll do a series of conversations specifically about, so that we can make this particular one focused on one of those problems that you do solve.
Yeah.
The other one I have a question about is, certainly from my own experience, I know in corporate there was this ongoing challenge where you'd have a great vision or a great purpose or goals that you've got, and then somehow the strategy, the execution of the strategy falls over. Is that something that you've also found?
Oh yeah, and you know, out there in the world, people call that the challenge of bridging the strategy execution gap. And often corporates will have this beautiful strategy. Maybe they've paid a lot of money for external consultants to help them develop this strategy, and then it sits in the CEO's desk's top drawer and never gets looked at again after it's been produced. And the business just goes on doing what they're doing. And again, it doesn't look like a decision-making problem, but actually underneath that, what we find the root of that not being effective is the decisions around which strategic initiatives should we pursue, which shouldn't we pursue, which ones do deliver on our strategic goals, which don't, where should we put our best, our resource to really deliver on the strategy. And most organizations are poor at that and don't realize that what's going on is a decision-making issue.
I've got one more question before we work out which one we're going to dig into today, and that's the area that I know that as a consultant is probably a big challenge, but the fact that you specialise in decision-making, I have a question about how you end up influencing the decisions when you're not the person who's actually in the organisation making the decisions. Like, it seems to me like that would be a rather difficult thing to do. It's like when you're in a job but you don't have the title in an organisation. It's not just from a consultant but to a client's perspective, but in any business, if you're not the boss or you're not the one who has the title and the authority, it's pretty hard to influence the decisions that you feel you want to make. Is this an area that you've got much, what do I say, talent in that area? But, you know, it occurs to me that lands somewhere in the area of decision making. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And there's a couple of different ways to look at that. So firstly, I suppose it's the perennial problem of any, let's say, professional service provider like consultants like us. We're outside an organization trying to help an organization improve what it does, work more effectively, make better decisions, and we have no direct say over that. So a lot of what I find myself and my team doing is working with leadership teams in having them see for themselves the value of better decision making. The other side, I guess, it's which is, I guess, the core of how we work, is people, and let's use this nice generic term, stakeholders, often experience no ability to influence or impact or get involved in decisions that directly affect them. My favourite example, of course, is the citizens of this beautiful country, Australia. How often would we actually say we get a chance to have a say in the decisions that are made by the government? Okay, we get to vote, but that's a pretty indirect method of decision making. Frankly, if the right person gets in, do they then execute the decisions you want? So I think two different things. We work almost always on the basis of how do you have stakeholders participate actively? What's the kind of decision process that enables someone to go, no, I really have a say in that decision, not just some kind of token, here's my opinion, but no, I really get to influence that decision. And that's a lot of that is down to really good process and requires often, of course I would say this, but requires often independent expertise to support that process, which then loops back to the first point, which is our challenge of being able to influence leadership teams in using good decision process. So, and I guess I don't want to avoid leading anyone up the garden path. Our role is never to influence the decision because, of course, we're external. Our job is to influence the use of good process. And that's, in some respects, even more of a challenge because, frankly, of course, I won't name any names, but there are many consultants out there who make a living from advising on decisions and saying, here's the right course of action, you should do this.
Right.
That is not what we do. And frankly, our experience, some of that upset we started not talking about at the beginning that leaders have, comes from their own lack of any ownership or engagement in decisions. Yep, they've delegated the decision to an external body called some consultant. They've given advice, said, here's the report, that's the course of action, and the leader feels no engagement or ownership in that. But at least they go, great, my back is covered because I've got the big name on the top of the report.
Yeah, right. Well, I feel like one of those girls in a 7-year-old girl in a lollipop shop for the first time, thinking about which lollies do I choose first, because everything you've spoken about so far is like, oh, okay, I want to learn more how to do that. And not only just from a business perspective, but this last one that you were talking about, influencing, I'm also interested in how to understand that better, not just in business, but for my relationship. Like all of a sudden I'm left with, oh, how could you mean there's a talent or a skill towards being able to master that process? Oh, I could use that to make sure I feel like I'm getting the traction I need. And in both ways, how can we be more effective as partners in making decisions to ensure that both of us feel like we're involved in the process and supported with what we need? So right now, I think there's a lot of things that you've mentioned in all those problems. And so I'm going to say, why don't we even step back? Because you did mention that right there that there was some fundamental upset and frustration and stress around that leaders experience, and they're not even generally aware that the problem is around decision making. So I think today, Paul, I would actually like to talk about that more specifically, what that challenge is. Because I think certainly for myself and for everyone, before we go down that garden path of looking at what is the problem that we're actually trying to solve, I think it firstly helps us to identify the need and why we even think that this is an important thing. And if it's okay with you, I would like to bring you back so that we can have a deep conversation specifically about each of those 4 problems. Would that work?
Yep, very happy to do that.
Okay, good. So why do you even think, what's this upset that you think's in the background for people around decision making?
I think let's pick an example. And everyone has experienced this concept of buyer's remorse. I've just gone out and bought the latest new, obviously in today's environment, perhaps not so, but just gone out and bought the latest new car. I was so excited to buy it. I get it home, I drive it down the street, and suddenly it just doesn't feel like it's the right thing. Now, most people would not experience that as a poor decision. They would just experience it as some kind of upset, some kind of disappointment. But what I know is, and the decision science bears all this out, is that what's happened is you've made some decision about the particular car you want to buy based on a bunch of factors that aren't really the things that matter to you. So your upset comes from it's not delivering on what you really care about. It's delivering on the things that maybe you thought you should care about. Someone had given you some advice that, of course, I should buy the latest this, that, or the other because of its wonderful environmental footprint, and yet you drive it down the road and frankly, you don't really care about that, but you didn't know that. So buyer's remorse is one of those upsets. And of course, you can imagine exactly the examples in the corporate or the professional workspace where the same thing happens. We've made this major decision. We've committed this major change program. We've started on it, and you as the leader just don't feel the energy towards it. And in fact, what you end up doing is marginalizing it or not committing the due resource to execute on it. And so often what that will feel like will be this. There's a momentary, let's say, relief from decisions made, because of course there's a lot of stress in decision making and a lot of tension building up to it. Decision made, thank goodness we can move on, and then very quickly left with that kind of either bitter aftertaste or just general malaise around, well, so what? And that's those sort of symptoms are what point me at, there's a decision making issue here.
Oh, I was like, oh, that explains my reaction to what happened when I purchased the Q7 and then spent a lifetime of concern over doing that until I decided to finally sell and downgrade to a Toyota. I think my purchase was pretty much off how I deserved it, but not recognizing that the desire to deserve it came from my experience of feeling like I was just falling apart with 3 kids under 3. Oh dear. Oh dear. Fabulous. And bringing it back to the workplace though, I can also see not only are we making decisions, and then there are many times we do know that we've made decisions that are not really the best interest of the organisation, but we do it because we think it's the right thing to do, or it looks like it's the right thing to do. But not only after the fact do we stop, what happens, I've seen certainly, is people just run from it.
Yes.
Just run. Let's just forget about it. Let's move on, and they keep pushing people to move on. But there's this tale of destruction that seems to exist with the people that work around them because they're just wanting to try and avoid the fact. Is that
exactly right? And I think that's, the kind of parallel of that buyer's remorse shows up in much more, let's say, impactful ways in the professional context, because what, I guess, just stepping sideways slightly from that, what we know is that decision making really has 2 halves to it. Most people think the job of decision making is to make the decision, should I buy the Audi or the BMW or the Toyota? But actually, the decision is only one half. And frankly, you could roll a dice or toss a coin and that will give you a decision. The hard bit is the commitment to the decision that has the decision carried out. So that release called, we've made the decision, yes, we're going to move house, we're going to open a new office in Hong Kong, whatever, that decision made, that relief from making the decision is, of course, extremely short-lived, because then you've got to live with the consequences. And unless the decision's been made in such a way that it actually takes into account that kind of future world you're building from the decision, you're in real trouble. Yet people put their attention on, have I got the decision? Not, am I making a decision that we're now actually committed to? It's back to that corporate context. Your example earlier around the strategy execution gap, that's one of the key things in there. It's making decisions that aren't actually aligned with what we say we care about as an organization. So, yeah, we've made the decision, we've invested in this new project, this change activity, but it's not actually consistent with our strategy. And so we'll find either we'll execute on it badly, we won't put the correct resource in it, everyone's disgruntled, it'll become a bit of an orphan in somewhere hidden away in the corner of the business, or we'll try and go full steam ahead and then we realize we're nowhere near hitting our strategy.
Oh my goodness, you remind me, I read an article about a month ago published by another colleague actually from a consultancy firm about questioning the expenditure of an organisation. And I'm going to plug it because I don't ever say that I'd probably be looking to them for sponsorship. McDonald's spent over $3 million on a CRM system without actually doing the right decision-making processes, and they ended up getting rid of it.
Yeah.
$3 million.
And unfortunately, the world is, particularly in the IT domain, the world is littered with examples of IT projects that have gone down that same path. And in fact, we have done work in that realm, and it's been interesting to jump into the realm of procurement of major IT systems and look at how it's typically done and see for us, because as I walk around the world and look, what I see is decisions everywhere. When I look at the world through my lens of decision making, it becomes blindingly obvious what's going on. And you can see particularly in, and I'll laugh because this brings it to the very humanness, often, and where we've been involved, CIOs, their number one requirement of the system is to have them not on the front page because it's a failure. So it's not about the functionality, it's not about the fit of the system, it's not about the cost, it's just about I don't want to get a reputational impact from doing this. And of course, if what I'd say in the world when I'm working with clients and pushing them pretty hard, I'll say, if you just want to make a decision that has the minimum reputational impact, the answer is no decision. Let's be straight about that. You've got to balance that. You've got to trade off the reputational risk from what is the upside. And unless you do that explicitly, of course, we see that in politics all the time. I suspect most people would imagine that the reputational thing is the only thing that drives political decisions.
Okay, so it's very easy, Paul, for us to sit here and look out there at others for their failure in making decisions, right? I mean, like hearing what you're saying, I'm like, absolutely. And then at the same time, I'm also hearing things like, oh, well, getting married. Geez, that's a decision. Well, geez, you wouldn't want to make the wrong decision and then just damage your reputation by saying, I'm not going to show up at the altar, which I've not personally done.
Yes.
But then you've got divorce. Well, that doesn't look good either. So in fact, if we bring it back to the humanity side, that's certainly some things we can see. So there's a whole lot of areas, I think, in life where we are plagued by the paralysis of decision making, I think, from what I'm hearing and what you're saying. And I want to actually quote something that I read of yours that you posted on LinkedIn recently from Seth Godin. You've said here, Seth Godin, as always, was on the money today. Much as we may not realise it, many of us make decisions for a living. And some of us even help others to make decisions. So why not consider greater decision effectiveness? So tell me more about this, Paul, because I do think we as individuals, taking it out of the corporate context for a second, because a corporation is simply a bunch of individuals in there making decisions, right? I want to now bring this conversation back to some ownership at the level of individual and how we can see how this plays out for ourselves. Because if we're going to get any traction, in my humble opinion, about having this work, it's one thing to have it work within an organisation, but I'm interested in humanity and I'm interested in enabling people to express their leadership and specifically getting some power in this. And so I'd like to look now for us about this comment you've said specifically about the decisions we make in life and how we can get some power about that.
Yeah, and I think I'm be the first to admit that if I look back over my career and my life, I've got plenty of points where I can see that was a terrible decision. Why did I make that? Now I have, of course, the benefit of this perfect hindsight, and I can see quite clearly what happened there in that decision. Why did I choose to maybe hire that person some time ago? Why did I choose to take my business in that direction? And what I notice, and I think this is directed to your point, what I notice there is undue influence over some of the factors that often are about the externality, the human need to be, I'm okay, people like me, I'm successful, and using that as a lens to make decisions. Of course, it's valid and we can't forget that. But if that becomes the only lens, we can end up in a very poor place. And I think that, as the car example is a good one, many people will choose a vehicle based on how it makes them look as they drive down the street or as they talk to their friends.
No, come on. I did look fabulous driving my Q7, seriously.
Exactly. And nothing wrong with that. In fact, what's wrong is to not admit that. And I think that's also where a lot of upset comes in decision making, is what I really want to consider in my decision is how it makes me look. That would be terrible to do that. How self-centered. So I'm going to write that thing off and I will buy the wrong thing. I will buy the thing that doesn't have any value in terms of making me look good. So I think it's one of the places we start with in decision making, is thinking about not the decision itself. So let's just put that on one side. It's not even about, do I buy the Audi or the BMW? Let's think about how I'm going to make the decision to buy the BMW or the Audi. Yeah. Let's think about how will I make the decision first before I even think about whether it is a BMW or an Audi. And often one of the reasons we say that is because once you think how you're going to make a decision, and therefore what's important in the decision, who knows what new things suddenly occur to you. You might not have realized that actually what mattered to you was looking fabulous, and therefore, although you thought you needed a Q7 because of the running the kids around and the vast size it has, actually, maybe a Porsche Boxster would have been a better answer for you, especially an open-top one where you can really look good because everyone can see your, how you're wearing your hair today, for example. So,
well, I have actually thought about that. Now you say that. All right, so I'm going to put us both in a place of leadership right now and expressing it, right? So one of the things that I know that you've commented, your view about leadership is someone who's open and authentic and has the courage to say when they don't have the answer, right?
Yeah.
And in my view, I do have quoted, in fact, Brené Brown's view. I love her view about great leadership is being able to inspire ideas and problem solving in others, but it takes being vulnerable, right? So right at this point, Paul, I'm going to put us into that place and actually take a look, put the spotlight on some stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to go first, or you can go first. What would you like?
Oh, you go first. And
You
I'll
play it
follow
on me and then we'll flip it back over to you.
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah.
So I left corporate, 2015. Was juggling 3 kids under 3, was unhappy in my job, but at the same time, I couldn't get flex work options.
Right.
There was just it was not possible. Now, I was great. I negotiated part-time. I still had the senior level authority, but I no longer had a team. I had no budget decision making. Like, I lost all the stuff that I really loved.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So 3 months down the track, I'm bitter.
Yes.
In a job I hate. So I go, that's screwed. I'm going to go do something about that. Right? That's my thing. I do
Yes,
that.
yeah,
If I'm not happy, I'm going to do something about it. So that was 2015 that I finally made the decision to exit out of there, right? Biggest lesson I made, lesson or mistake that I realise I've since made, is that I jumped out before really providing any financial stability, right?
Yeah,
I just went, let's just go do this and see what happens, right? And at the same time, I made the decision because I got myself to a point where I was like, you told my boss basically, you really shouldn't pay me in this money. You pay me too much money. You should get rid of me. So I walked out with the redundancy. So I went, yes, make the decision. But in hindsight, Paul, there was a number of things that I didn't deal with, called many people who leave a high-paying job like that, who've got 3 kids, have a mortgage, are going to find something to fall on.
Yes.
I didn't do that, right? I followed a purpose. I followed my passion. I started Team Women Australia. We started mobilising women. I was mentoring them for nothing. And so I wasn't getting paid for it, and then got stuck with, okay, I need to commercialise this. And I've done lots of things over the last 5 years, right? We've run workshops, we've run events. And every time I've hit a point where I'm like, it's just not the revenue model I think works. It's not the thing that's going to, events don't pay a lot of money.
Yeah.
Women are not paying, workshops not paying a lot of money. It's not a sustainable model. No, okay, try something else. So I tried, right? Now, last year, I decided I was not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater because I'm very committed to that purpose, right? So, but at the same time, I've got 3 kids. So I go, well, I'll focus on my core coaching business and I'll drive that. Ironically, coaching a lot of women in the same thing, but start building my coaching out. Incredibly successful last year. Just went from nothing to selling coaching at a very premium price and making a big difference, right? Great. Except 1 month before I'm about to launch one of the biggest workshops I'd planned for. It's taken me 6 months in the pipeline to sell this piece of work to Qantas, right? And here I am on the day, right? On the morning of, they call me and say, we want to increase the numbers from 25 to 35. 2 of Alan Joyce's direct reports, and we're going to run this resilience, wellbeing, performance workshop. Fantastic. 24 hours later, I get a call, Kylie, we need to postpone. We'll get back to you once we realise we just need to shuffle a few things around with the date. No problem. That was the Tuesday, Paul. Guess what happened on the Friday? They walk out of a town hall meeting with Mr. Alan Joyce himself, and I get a call. We have to let go of 20,000 staff. Kylie, I'm really sorry. We're not going to be able to go ahead with the work. There goes one of the biggest pieces of work I had scheduled for that month. Now, fortunately, I still had some stuff in my pipeline called coaching clients. So I picked that up, no problem. Literally, Paul, the following week, day by day, I got phone call after phone call. Can I put this on hold? Can I put this on hold? I've just had to sack 154 staff. We're not going to be able to do the workshop. Like, oh my God. So here I am, right? Sitting here now looking at some decisions that one needs to make. I've got a not-for-profit that, pending the income stability on that business, I've got to build for offering. Do I keep going with that or do I throw it out? Do I then just go, no, put all your eggs in your one basket? Oh, but if you spread yourself too thinly, you're never going to be successful in anything. So all of a sudden I'm confronted with all of this dialogue around making decisions. And quite frankly, one of the reasons when I reached out to you was like, I think my problem's decision making. I actually don't think the problem's out there in the business solutions at all. All the design, all the vision, all the structure, all the offering. I'm like, I think I'm just stuck on making a decision.
Well, good on you for spotting that could be what's going on, because it's I guess this current time we're in right now is really shining a light on some of these issues for us, because what you talked about there is what I call in my professional context the idea of trade-offs. There are some things I can have and some things I can't have, and if I have this, I don't get to have that. How do I make that trade-off? I can hear you grappling with the trade-off between the commercial success and the business model versus the purpose, and maybe the purpose doesn't actually naturally land in the place that makes money. How do I do about that? When you left your corporate job, you made the trade-off around follow my purpose and forget about financial stability. Yet you then went, oh, I'd gone hard over on. So that's what I can hear. And like I say, the times right now in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic, people are having to make some very stark trade-offs. And the neuroscience, as well as I do, one of the biggest challenges is how our brain is working and driving some of our decision making without us even realizing. So the cognitive biases that are unconscious to us yet are there playing away. And right now, we as humans are terrible at thinking long term. We'll always have jam today, not jam tomorrow. And when we're sitting in the middle of a pandemic, in isolation, in a world where we can't see this afternoon, let alone tomorrow or next week, it's really easy to be making those decisions in a very short-term context. And
I am doing that, Paul. Even last night, right, I went and scheduled a 7-week online program. Now, in applying the resilience, because I've been getting called up a lot lately around all of my expertise to help people. But of course, it's all for free at the moment because no one can afford anything. Now, I don't care. I'm okay with that at the moment. I mean, I'm no worse off, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, no way. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to give this stuff. People need to see this stuff so it makes a difference, right?
Yeah.
And then at the same time, I'm going, yeah, okay, well, if you're going to do that, then it's probably the right time you to now put something out there online so that people can do it over 7 weeks and start selling for it. But then I had this, like the last 24 hours, I'm like, that's just, you're operating yourself now out of your own limbic brain. You're making the decision to do that on the fear of money. You're not doing it based on you thinking strategically about whether it's the right time. So last night I made the decision, I'm putting it on hold.
Right.
I just went, no, I'm going to make the call. Also because there was an announcement last night about kids going back to school not until 11th of May.
Right.
Now, I was going to start that program on the 5th of May before they go back to school.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm just going to do the same thing to myself. I'm going to, without actually, it's all about limbic brain reaction rather than short term, immediate gratification, just to put a few bucks in my bank account, which, mind you, would help immensely considering my situation. So, okay, not going to do that. I need to step back and practice what I preach here called think more clearly using your prefrontal cortex. Do think strategically because you could very well go down the path now of short-term gratification, be a year down the track, and you've actually not really unpacked the proper strategy.
It's one of the things I see. It feels like in this current environment, the world of business is split into two halves. There are those that are saying we've just got to hunker down and hang on, and once this is all through, then we can start to look forward. And I totally get that. You can see how so many sectors have been decimated by what's happening right now, and so there's no surprise and no judgment on me on people taking that choice. But that's one half of the world. The other half of the world is saying this will pass, and the job is to be set up for when it does pass that we can accelerate as quickly as possible off the back of it. And so what does it take to do that? And that's a classic short-term here and now trade-off versus long-term. Plus the fact that we as human beings are naturally risk averse. So anything that feels like it's got risk in it, do we really want to pursue that? And so what I would say is, and I know you're not asking for an answer, but...
Goodness, because that's part of my brain wiring, right? Like there's absolutely the part that I know there's the discovery for myself. I get that. And at the same time, I'd be lying if I didn't say, no, just give me the answers. Let me go drive through Macca's right now. Here's my order. Please give me what I need to know.
Oh, well, there you go. So, and of course, in true consulting style, the answer I would give is more about how you think about it rather than what is the way to think.
Yeah,
and
right.
And frankly, that is what most of my days are spent doing. It's bringing decision process to people who are grappling with the problem. And one of the things I would say in any decision process is to get explicit about what it is you're dealing with. Because of that, so much influence from our limbic brain driven by unconscious bias. When we're facing the push the buy now button, we will act on that basis. One of the tasks, the opportunities is to say, how can I step back from that for a moment? And what I'd say is just pause and write down, what are some of the options I'm even considering? Let me have them all on the table in front of me. Because often the way the world presents itself to us is something comes at us and says, decide now. Oh, yeah, And of course, we know the world of marketing and advertising is geared towards that. It's driving us to make that decision here and now rather than have it in a considered way. So what I would always say is, and it's really hard right now because there's so much immediacy, but actually you've got to pause for a moment, say what are the different things I could consider going forward on the one hand, and on the other hand, what actually do I care about? And I care about more than one thing. We always do. So I do care about financial stability. So that is important. I shouldn't discount that, and otherwise you find yourself where you did after you left your corporate role.
That's right.
But equally, I mustn't forget I do care about the difference I'm making, the purpose, the well-being of my family, my friends. I care about those things. So if that's the mix of things that matter to me right now, and it might even just be, I also care about just feeling good about myself. And again, there's no judgment in what you feel good about or what matters to you. It is what matters to you. That's clear. Here's the things I could look at going forward, the different alternatives and options that I've got. Like I said earlier about the car, once you're clear on what you care about, sometimes new alternatives emerge for you. You suddenly go, oh, I do really care about, I don't know, supporting my local community. So maybe one of the things I could do is, I don't know, set up a book exchange on my porch or whatever. Then you've got your alternatives, what you care about, and now at least you've got a clear picture of everything. So now I can start to, in a more considered way, starting to use that critical thinking part of the brain, start to pick it apart and say, well, I can pursue here, I can pursue here, I can pursue with this, I can pursue with this. And when we immediately scale that up into the kind of corporate context, that's the sort of thing that might take 6 months for the kind of process we'd run, is picking all that apart and then reassembling it. But I guess the nugget in it is the temptation is to make the decision now, when really do you actually have to make the decision now, or is it worth investing a bit of time in deciding how I'm going to make the decision and then make the decision from that basis?